much for accepting this interview.
Thank you.
For giving me a little time to ask you some questions about your music and you as an artist. So yeah, I think we can start this interview by asking you some question about your most recent releases, like Felix Ambassadors.
Sure.
So could you please tell and explain a little bit the composition process while you were working on the music for Phalanx Ambassadors? I read something on the Mike Sokazaki's blog when he talked about how hard he had to work on your music. So yeah, could you please tell more about it?
Yeah, he wrote a really generous, long thing about that process, which, yeah, it was interesting and also obviously pretty flattering that someone like, well, I mean, he's one of my best friends too, but also just someone with his kind of mind, hearing him, seeing him talk about it. But so what are we in, 2021? I wrote that first piece on Phalanx, the one called Stretch Goal.
Yeah.
I think I wrote it in, I think it was 2011.
Wow.
Yeah. See, the thing about a lot of the music on the 4 records that I have on Pi as of right now, Fiction, Vista Accumulation, Pouting Grimace, and Phalanx, almost all that music was written like kind of at the same time.
Oh, interesting.
It's the way releases go, it's kind of has like that sort of, people assume that like everything is like, and sometimes it is with artists, you know, like people assume that everything is written sequentially. Like I wrote all the music for my first record and then that was that.
Your
I wrote all the, well, yeah. And it's like, and then I wrote all the music then for the second record and then did all that, you know, it's like, but the fact of the matter is that like I was writing, same week I'd write Etudes and like one of the work on a piece for Vista. But there's also like a lot of quartet music that didn't make it onto Vista, like about almost another 2 albums worth of stuff that we just didn't record because it was like, got to draw the lines somewhere, you know, like, but anyway, so I wrote, actually, as with a lot of my tunes, the first tune on Phalanx, Stretch Goal, like for a while, I wasn't even sure that it was going to be a tune because it was like, I always have a piece or two that are like partially completed at a given time where it's like, even for me, I'm not sure if it's like, even for me, if it's going too far, you know, like if it's like, if it's like a little too weird. I mean, now I'm just like, there is no too far or too weird at this point.
You're set like a standard of difficulty in your pieces.
Well, you know, everyone has a level like that. It's just maybe different for different people, but
absolutely.
But I wasn't, you know, it's just like, is this really a piece or is this just like, and so often those end up being the things that I like the most later on, or things that other people like the most. Like the 6th tune on Phalanx, the tune called Be Irreparable.
Yeah.
Miles, you said Miles was talking about how hard the music was, and a lot of the pieces were equally hard for me to play.
No matter the fact that you wrote it.
Oh yeah. Well, because I don't really write at the piano. Like I don't sit and I'm not against it. It's just like I tend to avoid, although lately I've been thinking of getting back into this, but I tend to avoid like the method of being at the piano, playing something, writing it down, playing something, writing it down.
To avoid like a sort of more idiomatic style of writing.
Right. I try to actually avoid for myself having it be. You know, it's funny because, you know, you tend to get annoyed as a sideman if someone gives you something that's not idiomatic for the piano, you know. But then I usually just learn to play it anyway because no one likes a complainer, you know. But for myself, I try to like purposely write stuff. kind of always write away from the piano.
Yeah,
Like
I could
I
totally
just,
agree with that.
it's just what I've liked to do for years. So like, cause that way it's also like a different kind of relationship with the sort of, you know, with pitch and rhythm and just hearing stuff in general. so yeah, so that piece, Be Irreparable, the sixth piece, there's a section in it for like basically the second half of the piece. My part is, it's basically like a 4-part chorale, more or less, just 4-note chords. It's like 4-note chords, but every note, every voice has its own distinct rhythm that doesn't repeat, and is not the same. And then there's a tempo relationship between the top two and the bottom two voices.
Like a
that's
sort
like
of
7 again.
canon ratio between the voices.
Yeah, it's not really canonic, but it's just like, basically it's like the top two are 7 against 6, then it goes 6 against 7, then 8 against 6, then 9 against 5, and both, it's subdivided. So, and none of it only just lines up occasionally. And it took me like about a year and a half to learn that. I mean, a year and a half to learn that part, but just like, cause I was doing other stuff with my life, like learning other music and playing other stuff, but it took me forever. And I was just like, it was one of those things where like, even once I started to have it learned, I was like, is this too weird, or does this even work? And everyone in the band is always, that was the thing that happened with this album and this band in particular with Phalanx. Like there was a lot of steps along the way where I was a little unsure, but just because I don't set out to write. It's not my goal to write complicated music. I know people think of me as some people think of me as like the complicated music guy, because I get hired to do that, and because my music is fairly complex, and it's like it's really, for me, it's not that I enjoy music that has like stuff going on. I do like that, yes, but it's not like the reason I do it. It's just more that like I tend to naturally gravitate towards coming up with things that are sort of just turn out like that. And so for years and years, I avoided doing that. I avoided like I would often stop short of just like, okay, well, I don't think I can get anyone to play this. I can barely play this. Well, yeah, just because there is no precedent for this. Like coming up, when I was younger, I've always been like this with my music. And I kind of never really had a situation where there were other people who liked to write the same kind of music as me, or like to try, like pushing themselves to be able to play things a little bit that just happen to be beyond one's ability or whatever.
Maybe the curiosity is a lack of curiosity.
Well, for some people,
for
a lot of times it's just like, also it was just a process of discovery for me, and I just realized, I just had to figure out how to do it for myself first, which is why I wrote all these etudes that were on fiction. Because I just was like, I didn't, before I can ask anyone else to play my hard ass music, I should be able to at least be far enough along that I can play it and teach it to other people,
Absolutely.
And then after a while I realized, oh, well, there's actually a lot of people, like if they can't immediately do it, they're similar to me in that they want to. And so all it takes is like someone who has a certain level of ability and also a level of just curiosity and desire to be able to do it. So anyway, the Phalanx music was kind of like, the music on that record was sort of the most recent example of my kind of process of just not holding myself back, just letting myself write whatever needs to be written, whether it's complex or not, And all the pieces on that album are related to each other.
Okay. So there are some materials that you continuously developed through the pieces.
Yeah, they're all the same length. All the the composed portion,
Yeah.
like the notes on paper,
Yeah.
are all, every piece is 396 beats long.
Ah.
The long ones, the short ones. I mean, the difference in length
In
and the
tempo
tracks.
relationships and pulses.
Just the literal ink on the paper is the same amount of beats in every composition. The reason the tracks on the album are different lengths is because like the second or third tracks are both under 2 minutes, but the quarter note is very fast, so it just goes by quickly. And we don't do any vamping for we don't have any long improv sections in those pieces, so they just go by really fast.
Okay.
Whereas phasic haze ramps, that long piece, there's 8 different open sections, which we don't. I didn't put any restriction on how long we do it. So
okay.
But yeah, so and then the pitch material is all sort of related to itself too. I transformed one to get to the other, kind of thing. Yeah.
Okay, so you have a sort of continuously relationship between the pieces, so aside from the difficulty that a listener could have, there is like a sort of logic through the pieces, not for the singular composition in the album.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that it's going to be perceptible to anyone unless they're really studying the scores, but it's just a unifying fact. It's just a thing that composers do. It's like they like, certain types of composers like to put things in their pieces, like little details, they like to, that's part of the kind of the joy of it, is constructing something intricate, and it doesn't have to be audible to the listener.
Absolutely.
But the hope is that it creates a kind of like some kind of unity, some unifying whatever, some kind of unifying kind of idea that might be just kind of felt on like a sort of maybe a subliminal level or something like that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So it may helps you to organize the whole part, maybe.
You mean in terms of like having like a whole concept for the whole project together, you mean?
Yeah, so you maybe eventually, like I remember when you had your Instagram account active, you shared the
I'm sorry, the what did you say?
Instagram account.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, when it was active, I remember you shared some of the raw scores for Stretch Goal. At the time, it has the title Stretch Goal 1, Stretch Goal 2, Stretch Goal 3.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I saw like you have those big sheets, like orchestra scores, sheets for arranging.
I wrote out Stretch Goal 4 on one of those. Yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I remember seeing like.
Well, that was.
Yeah, please.
I was going to say that was when the reason I did that was Stretch Goal 4, which is phasic haze ramps on that album. Yeah. That piece sat for months unfinished. I only had the top line and the bottom line.
And you tried to connect those parts.
Yeah, I tried all sorts of different things. I have a lot of material that I wrote for that piece that I didn't use. Like I was trying to figure out how to, because it was long, but I wasn't really exactly sure. It didn't feel done to me.
Yeah.
So I was just like, you know what? I'm going to see. I think I read it in some Morton Feldman interview. I think it was him that said it, where he encourages his students to recopy their music out. Like just write it again, or like write, if you've composed a piece of music, write it out again. And then, because like, I forget exactly his reasoning, but it's at the time it seemed like it. I was like, it was taking me months, and it was like, ugh. Well, I got to finish this thing. You know how it is. It's not like writer's block, but it's like
some ideas came after. You have some like a little piece of idea. You like take a rest from it, and then after months, after years, you came to it, and then in like a flow, you tend to end the whole piece maybe in a day or two, a week, like a sort of stream of consciousness.
Well, yeah, I mean, I had a really specific way that I was writing this piece, and I knew what the end. It's like I knew what the beginning and end were going to be, but I wasn't sure if there was going to be stuff in the middle. So I was just like, well, okay, I'm going to write out the top and write out the bottom and leave some stuff in the middle and see if it just brings up any. See if I can think of anything. So what I did was I just then I composed a middle line to kind of just, okay, well, like I said to myself, let's just assume I'm going to keep the top and bottom lines. What would I have to write in the middle that would make me think that would make me happy with what I had come up with? And I wrote it, and then it was like, oh, okay, now it's done, you know?
Yeah.
So then I'd solved it, you know?
I can understand it. Like in those days lately, I've seen like Brian Fernandez interview, where he actually talk about those kind of things. Like sometimes he had to chop parts from his composition, like for the sonatas for string quartet. And some of the material that he had, he didn't like it, so he chopped it out and try to write music that can connect those parts that are chopped.
Right.
So
sure. Yeah.
In fact, that you start talking about those kind of things, I was wondering how you try to organize the orchestration for this kind of music. So
for that record?
Yeah, for that record, and after for your large ensemble record from Accounting Grimace. So how you came to the orchestration, the parts, you tend to write for like the instrument, you have the instrument in your mind, sound of the whole piece, so like you tend to write for a single musician. So in this case, Maestro Kazaki, I know how it will sound with him, and I tend to write the music with him in mind.
It's a mixture.
Okay.
In both cases, in those two specific cases, actually, I've had in terms of the instrumentation for both those records, they go back to when I was like a teenager coming up. When I started writing music when I was like 11 or 12, but like when I was a teenager, I was into, I got into jazz and creative music really young, like around that age. And I was always really, really into woodwinds. I just love, because I loved the Rite of Spring. So it's like the intro to the Rite of Spring is all the,
Yeah.
For instance, I mean, like that was like kind of my big introduction to like hearing bassoons and English horns play with each other and stuff. And I loved those sounds. And so for a long time, like starting then, I would have ideas of like knowing that music and then getting into Anthony Braxton and hearing all this other, our ensemble Chicago and hearing, like jazz players play bassoon and stuff, and it's like, well, that's great, because
absolutely.
I'm hearing this and I'm hearing that. And so I always kind of imagined, those kinds of sounds and like percussion and then like electronics. I just kind of like, it's just an example of sounds that I had always wanted to write for. Same thing with the phalanx instrumentation. I kind of was always interested in the combination of vibes, guitar, and rhythm section. That's the same thing. It's like I had just had it in my mind as an abstract sound. And so as far as like writing, for me it's both writing for an instrumentation, and then when the time came, when around the time I was planning on writing Pouting Grimace, I thought, well, I could actually, because I had Pouting Grimace, it began as a single bar composition for our band Snark Horse, the band that Kate Gentile and I have together. And I liked that. I had been imagining this expanded version of that where I took that bar and use that as the material to make this big piece. And originally I was thinking it would just be electronics. Then I thought, well, maybe I can add woodwinds. And then I just was like, well, let's just make it a whole crazy thing. And so I had the idea, but I'm kind of more interested in knowing the mind of the player that I am hiring, that I'm having play my music. Like, I'm not going to just write for oboe and then just hope I can find a good improvising oboist.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, I want to like their playing already enough to like, I'm going to have it on a record or something like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it just so happens that I just happen to be fortunate enough to know people who are amazing improvisers on, you know, most instruments that get used, you know? So, I mean, so as a result, for Pouting, I basically had the ensemble I had everyone planned. I had everyone scheduled for the session. Okay. Like, I scheduled the session in like July. Actually, I was at Siena when I finished the scheduling. When I was writing the last emails to everyone, I remember, because I remember doing this. I was like sending emails to Scott Robinson and whoever while I was at Siena, and in 2016, and I planned the session for March 2017. And so I knew as early as the summer who I was going to be writing for. And so I knew that, okay, I got John Ravigon, Anna Weber, Scott Robinson, Sarah Schoenbeck, Ben Kono, who plays oboe and English horn. I knew from the John Hollenbeck big band, because we're in the John Hollenbeck ensemble together. He plays lead alto in that. Of course, he's one of these freaks who can play every flute, every clarinet, all the saxophones, and oboe and English horn. And not only that, is like a great improviser on these instruments too, you know.
Equally.
But so yeah, and then I got, you know, I had Kate, who not only is my musical partner, but is, you know, she's my girlfriend, and we live together. So we talk about this music all the time. So that's easy. That's always an easy choice, you know. Plus, you know, she has her own music, which is very, very, you know, we like a lot of the same things. So it's like writing I could just write anything and she'll devour it. And then having, of course, Chess and Dan and, you know, all those people. It's like, it's not so much like, what do I think they'll like? Although it is a little bit like that. I just kind of assume that if they're involved, if anyone's choosing to be involved with me, that they're gonna like it somehow, you know?
Yeah.
So I it's just more like knowing that, oh, they're capable of, even if it's something is very, very difficult for a person who's playing my music, I know that they'll just figure it out somehow, you know.
I understand.
And the same thing with Phalanx is that I actually had some of that difference. The difference thing with that is that I had some of the Phalanx music written before I knew what band I'd play it with.
Okay.
So we did a Stone gig, a gig at the Stone in New York City, and I was friends with Miles, and we had started to play together, and I just was like, do you want to? With him, I was just like, I wasn't even, at the time, I was like, you know, I was still at that period where it was like, I wasn't sure if, like, you know, it's like, hey, you want to play a gig with my music, play a gig with my band, which in itself is a normal question to ask. And then you send them the music and they're just like, all right. And because people people don't always want to rehearse. That's the thing.
Yeah.
There's always this thing in New York. This is all obviously pre-pandemic.
Pre-pandemic, of course.
Obviously now it's all different. Now anyone's just like, yes, is there a gig? I'll do it. Whatever, I don't care. You know? But
of course.
But Miles was super into it, and everyone in Phalanx was incredibly dedicated. You know, Kim Cass, the bass player, he's just like one of us. He writes.
Yeah,
I know. Crazy.
He's like a superhuman on the double bass.
Well, and his composing is also,
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
it's the same level as his playing. It's super, just is dealing with a lot of, he's dealing
Maybe
with some other shit.
maybe this is the thing that you all have in common. So
Yeah.
you could every one of you could approach those kind of music more easily and more with more passion, because
Well, yeah.
you was dedicated to those kind of aesthetic and interest of those kind of materials and techniques. So maybe this is
I,
the
basically, I don't, it's not easy for any of us, really.
yeah, absolutely,
It's just difficult in different ways, but because we keep working, it's like anything. You practice stuff and you get better at it, you know? So
absolutely,
if
absolutely,
you, then some things get easier. Like, so things, it's definitely the case that for all of us, that things that were hard for, like for me, things that were hard for me 10 years ago are not as hard anymore, you know?
absolutely.
And so like now I find myself practicing things that like 10, 15 years ago I would have thought were impossible, you know?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So from this subject, I actually want to ask you a question about your etudes,
Hmm.
uh, because I thought that I remember in one of your past interviews on maybe on Instagram. I can't remember clearly at the moment, but I remember that you said that you tend to utilize those etudes to assimilate some of new concepts about the rhythm, about the pitch selection.
Hmm.
So maybe some of those etudes you have to utilize them to assimilate some of this material that you eventually use on some other project like Vista Accumulation, Haunting Grimace, and Feelings Ambassadors.
I mean, more or less, yes. Not, it's not so conscious. It's not like, okay, now that I've written this, I can do
Yeah,
this. But
absolutely. Yeah, of course.
it's more like the etudes were more, and are, it's more about like, well, there's all these things that one can do. It's like, if you can imagine, well, what, I could write a piece doing this and do, and then it's like, there's a thing with composers where you get, if you feel like there's like an infinite number of choices, it's, there's, it can have the same end result as if you have no ideas at all,
Absolutely.
because in both cases it's very easy to end up with a situation where nothing gets composed, you know, because you're either like have no ideas and you can't think of anything, or there's too many ideas and you can't pick one, you know.
Absolutely.
So the point of the etudes for me was to like just like be like, okay, I'm just going to write pieces for piano that are short, just two systems a piece, and I'm just going to come up with a single idea, and I'm not going to spend forever on each piece. I'm just going to write just a short amount of material, and then I'm done, and then I write another one, you know. So it's, you know, it's like every composer does. You just have, whether it's conscious or not, you have parameters, you know.
Yeah.
You just impose some parameters, and like, if you know, there's a, some people, you know, everyone, you know, this is, I'm not trying to speak for all composers, but a lot of composers are kind of, are sort of like this, you know. Some people are just like, they just write, and they just don't think about that sort of thing, and which is fine, you know. It's like, you know,
Yeah.
for me the inspiration is more, it's not so much a blast of like, I heard this piece in my sleep last night and it was this fully, I'm just writing it down, you know. It's like
Yeah. Absolutely.
you have a little, you have a little germ of an idea, and you gotta have to kind of, you know.
Work it out. Yeah. I
Yeah,
think
exactly.
I think that this concept of like composing like a flourish of romantic thoughts, the music came by itself. It's like the remain of a romantic cliche, maybe. That
Could be.
yeah, if you look at like the post Darmstadt composers,
Hmm.
it becomes the opposite. So
Right.
you have to think about it to formulate like a concept, a parameter, a limitation that you will eventually use to create compositions based on that.
Sure.
So
Mhm.
the cliche may
Mhm.
be
Yeah. Yeah. Many of us are just a few steps away from some cliche or other, you know?
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I totally agree. Uh, absolutely. So yeah, I was wondering while I listened to your album like in a rotation. I start with Phalanx
Mhm.
Ambassadors, Ponting Grimace, Fiction. Then I go
Wow.
the albums with Tim Byrne, Forage, etc.
Oh, yeah.
And
Nice.
I was wondering, like, especially on a tune on Ponting Grimace, Brim,
Oh, yeah.
how, like, to go more in detail about it, how you worked on the rhythmic stratification on that tune. Because like when
So,
I heard it, I remembered that you utilize a common theme,
mhm.
and you try to orchestrate in different ways by organize different strata of rhythms and
Mhm.
ratios. So please,
Yeah.
could you explain a little more about it?
So Brim is the piece that comes the most directly from the original composition, one
Okay.
bar composition called A Pouting Grimace. If you listen to the end of Brim and you focus on my piano part, the thing that's played like 11 times at the
Yeah.
very end of Brim, the part I'm playing on piano is the original bar,
Okay.
is the bar A Pouting Grimace.
Okay.
It's literally the exact same thing. So everything comes from that. So what I did to write Brim was this. I wrote 19 different variations on that bar. So by which I mean, so that bar basically it's 5 beats long. It's 10 beats long, sorry.
Okay.
And over 5 of the beats, that is that's 9 in the space of 5. So it's 9 against 5, that
Okay.
polyrhythm. And then the left hand is mostly just playing quarter notes, sixteenths, and eighths. But for
Okay.
5 of the beats, it's that ascending thing. So what I did was I wrote 19 different variations, basically different. I changed the pitch and the rhythm slightly. I always kept the 9 against 5, but I changed the subdivisions of each
Okay.
of the variations and the pitches.
Okay.
So I had 20 versions of this, right? So then what I did was I just kind of put them in different orders. Like I kind of put them in an order that seemed like to make sense to me. Like that felt like a progression of sorts. So like start with one and eventually you hear all 20 of them
Yeah.
in the piece.
Actually, yeah.
So what I did was it's in a sense the basic ideas were pretty simple. It's just like I wrote one thing, made 20 variations of it. And so what I did was I had each of them in order, right? So my right hand material I gave to Patricia Brennan, the vibraphonist. She played. I get her part is exactly my right hand part,
Okay.
doubled. And then the high woodwinds, flute, oboe, soprano sax. I composed material that was sort of like similar to, but not identical to my right hand material.
Okay.
So it kind of sounds like they're playing something similar, but the rhythms are different. So it's kind of creating this kind of,
This sort of
you know,
rhythmic dissonance.
a little bit.
Yeah.
And then bassoon and contrabass clarinet are doubling my left hand.
Okay.
Exactly. And then I was like, this is great, but so what do I give the bass? What do I give bass and drums? And so what I decided to do was give them a third or fourth, depending on how you look at it, level of rhythmic material that goes against everything else.
Okay.
Part of this is because I knew that we were going to be doing this in the studio. We were going to be building it up. So we played this to a click track, you know.
Okay, of course.
Because I knew going in that it was like, we have the studio, so it's going to be, I'm going to be able to just be super exact and take our time and everything. So it's like, the point of this album was to make a construction. It was to make a composition, a big composition that was using the studio as part of the tools, you know. So this is just to explain why, like, how we were able to in 3 days, like, do this whole album where this one piece has 9 against 5 and then like often like 7 against that in the bottom. And it's like, it's stuff that I would have needed like a week or two to rehearse the band if we were going to like play this, like do a tour of this music, you know?
Yeah.
But anyway, so I had all this stuff, and then so basically going back to this, everyone had what they were going to play, but I wanted to have some improvising. So I just decided to have these little open spaces where like the pressure kind of just sort of dissipates. Okay. And people then, so there was a specific length of time, you know, and maybe some material that like glockenspiel and harp were playing, and then other people would improvise in these spaces. And so I would have it so like one person starts, and then the next gap, that person improvises again, and then the second person starts and they play together. And then going on, first person drops out, third person comes in, they play together. And so it kind of like goes sort of like cascading duos towards the end of it.
Wonderful.
And then eventually it just kind of gets this sort of, at the end of this sort of this ecstatic kind of thing that you hear, where it's like this sort of like, I don't know, waterfall or avalanche or something, you know.
Yeah. Wonderful.
Some nature analogy. Yeah.
Wonderful. Yeah, so I was wondering to the role that Taishan had on that record. Aside from being a conductor, he was like managing the improvisation parts too. Okay.
No. I've noticed in some of the reviews of that album, people maybe, this is not in any way to take away from the way Taishan helped on that record, but no, he was like a conductor in the classical sense. Okay. Classical sense. Like, it was just because, so what happened was, as it turned out, I got a commission from John Zorn for there's this performance venue, there's this venue in Brooklyn called National Sawdust. Okay. And he had, probably still has again, pandemic, so I don't know what's going on with it now, but a series where every Wednesday, it was called the Stone Commissioning Series, or the Stone Commissions, where like he would present a different composer every Wednesday playing some new music, and it was a commission. So I managed to, just really like a twist of good fortune, I managed to get, he asked me to do this, and I got to have my concert be like a week before the recording session. So I was like, okay, I didn't really think of how we were going to play this stuff live. So how am I going to do this? And I just thought, oh, well, we'll have to have a conductor. And I wrote Taishan, and I originally was like, hey, my first question was, do you know anyone who would be able to conduct this stuff, or who would be into it? And then right away I was like, well, I should at least ask. I mean, he's a friend of mine, so it's not like a crazy question, but I should at least ask him if he would do it, you know, because I mean, not to say there aren't several people who would have done a fantastic job, but as probably most people, or a lot of people watching this know already, would be uniquely qualified to do something like this. Absolutely. And he immediately said he wanted to, and he just had to check if he was able to do it. And he was. So I had him conduct this this everything, all the pieces live, just because, you know, I was kind of sort of I wouldn't say it's unprecedented. I'm sure other people have, you know, in the kind of the specific way we were attempting it. It was like rhythmically, it was a lot to do in a short amount of time.
Absolutely.
And so, but for the studio, we basically just needed a pulse. For something like Brim, which I just explained, it isn't going to work unless everyone is hearing the same pulse, you know, unless we have someone kind of going like that. Now in the studio, we did it from the ground up. The first day was the rhythm section and the percussion. Second day was the woodwinds. So the woodwinds were playing to a click track or depending on what they wanted to hear in their headphones, the rhythm section had already played.
Okay.
And strictly speaking, I maybe didn't need Taishan in the studio, but there was room in the budget for him anyway. And I just was like, there's no reason not to have him there, because on top of just the fact that it would be helpful, he in particular, you know, again, as we know, he's like a living, breathing version of this kind of music. I mean, he just like,
absolutely,
he gets it immediately, of course.
Maybe memorize it too.
Yeah, I mean, I've played several gigs with him of different other music of mine where he did that, no question, with no rehearsals. And but yeah, so in this case, so all he did was he conducted the woodwinds on Brim and on Sick Fields.
Okay.
So I know a lot of, you know, because I know he does conduction, you know, he has his own kind of conduction kind of things, and some of the reviews of this record I could be wrong, but it seems like some people might assume that he was doing something like that on this record, but no, he had a score that he was conducting from, and he was giving beats and extremely helpful suggestions on, like, you know, I mean, he was insanely respectful of, like, is it okay if we do this, or can I ask them to do this, or in terms of just like expression kind of things, you know, stuff conductors do. But really, it's like, it was kind of a luxury to basically just be able to have him to do that. I guess I could have probably done that. I had enough other stuff with producing the album or co-producing it with David Torn that, like, I just didn't want the stress. I'm not really a conductor. I probably could have figured it out, because a lot of it's just like, but I don't know. I was a little, and still am, because I haven't really conducted. I still have. It's been now 4 years since we recorded that record, and I've never conducted. So I'm like, I don't want to be one of those guys who thinks his music's so awesome that he can just conduct it without knowing how to conduct, you know?
Yeah.
Like, so I just, you know, it's like one of those things where it's like you have a bunch of people in front of you, and, like, you know, I don't want them, if they're going to be annoyed with me, I want them to be annoyed with me for other things, not trying to conduct when I'm not a conductor, you know?
Absolutely. So, yeah, I was to come back to your some of the stuff that you at the time shared on your Instagram account.
Right.
There was like a game where you have to share some of your favorite recordings. And I remember that you share like a whole catalog of your recordings, and it popped to my eye some of the recordings of the music of Brian Fernandez, like the complete works for string quartet and trio. I remember maybe the complete works for piano, and some of the recordings of the music of Xenakis and Feldman. So I was wondering how those contemporary composers influenced your music, and how the first time after you listened to them you managed to get through those concepts and techniques and to assimilate them for your own sake.
Well, the way I would say for me, the way I if get inspiration from, I would say it's inspiration as opposed to like, I mean, I have the scores of a lot of those composers you've mentioned. And so it's not so much that I'm sitting down and doing like set theory analysis
No,
of, it's not like it's not like, not that I'm against that.
no, absolutely,
That's
absolutely.
cool. I'm just saying for me, it's just like, I'll look at the score and it's sort of like kind of general big picture notions. Okay. So for Fernandez, at the very, as for probably for a lot of people who like his music, there's the seductive quality of his scores, how sort of like just sort of mesmerizing they are. But also, and then also, what it kind of brings up in terms of the why, like, why is he doing this? Like, I mean, I have a high tolerance for complexity, as I guess we've established. And his score, his scores, I probably wouldn't write the type of material rhythmically that he writes for people. But my relationship is also to rhythm is a little different because, I mean, no matter what, I consider myself a jazz musician first and foremost before anything, There's a reason I'm not a concertizing pianist. There's a few reasons I'm not, but mostly just that even with music I love, it's like I'm not so interested in playing the same thing forever, or the same. I just need to improvise. It's always kind of been the way my brain's worked. I should say, I could, like, maybe there's a parallel universe where I did become a concertizing pianist, but I'm a very different person in that universe where I'm much less easygoing because I'm stressed about playing shit perfectly or whatever, But anyway, my point is that, like, with Fernie Ho, it's like a lot of it's like the music is like, why is he doing this? But after a while, you understand, okay, well, so there's a reason for this. It kind of has to do with like kind of maximizing one's potential. Xenakis in a similar way.
Yeah.
Like pushing one to one's mental or physical limits, but also it's like trying to kind of discern these composers' processes. And the thing about Fernandez is, if you listen to it, it sounds like it kind of sounds like some crazy group improvisations in a way.
Yeah, absolutely.
To me, in a good way. It's actually,
absolutely.
It's one of those things where it's like people see anything that's more complex than Mozart or Donnelly, people think is intellectual.
Absolutely.
It's this thing that, and like, which is not to say that it's like, it's this implied zero-sum game where it's like it's either intellectual or it's emotional or whatever, and I've definitely been sensitive about that in the past, but not without meaning to be sensitive. I just think it's a preposterous idea that it's like, there's music that's atonal or less tonal, or less obviously based on the quarter note grid. The idea that music is intellectual first and foremost is just, it just kind of says more about the person saying it than
absolutely,
in my opinion.
No,
but anyway,
I totally agree about it.
So I guess what I'm saying though with Fernandez, it's like, wow, this is just some beautiful music, honestly. Even if no matter what goes into it, and no matter how mind-boggling the scores are, Anyway, it's just, with composers, it's just like, oh, it really is as simple as liking or loving the sound of their music and then being intrigued by it. So for Feldman, Feldman goes down easier for more people because it's more, you know, it's like the meditation version of avant-garde music, which I mean in a
Absolutely.
flattering way, and which I'm sure he would have.
Totally agree.
Well, I don't know. I think he would have hated it. I think he would have hated the idea that like that on the road I go to sleep to his music, you know,
absolutely.
at night.
I remember
you know,
a video where he actually discussed with Elliot Carter about the duration of his pieces. Like anyone needs another 30-minute piece, and he said,
all right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, so yeah, and so like with Feldman, it's like, oh well, okay, let's focus on. It appealed to me because it's repetitive. That is sort of like tangentially related to various types of improvised music, you know, vamps basically, but
Yeah.
repetitive in a only sort of like, it's not literally repetitive, you know, sometimes it's literally repetitive, but then it's like there's these bigger structures.
Yeah.
And then it's like super, you know, it's like if you take Webern's music and just sort of like time stretch it 6,000 times, whatever.
Absolutely.
And then Xenakis is just this, you know, it sounds like volcanoes. It sounds like basically nature, you know, to me.
Absolutely.
Or the violent side of nature. There's a super visceral aspect to it. But it's also like, it's like, I don't know. It just incites this kind of extreme, intense thought. To me, it's just really visceral. It's like body music, you know.
Yeah.
Xenakis is, but body in the sense of including the brain, because there's also, if you pay attention to details, there's like a massive amount of detail. But it's super visceral music. It gets you low, you know, get you deep, you know.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So it's just, you know, my answer is just a fancy version of just, I like the sound of the music. And so I wanted to study it, you know, but then found further interest in the details, you know.